to the recap of the Tech Mahindra Global Chess League. This league is actually being held in London. It started on the 3rd of October and it stretches all the way to the 12th of October. We have 6 teams participating at this very, very strong league. And we have teams from all over the world. I think the teams we have the Alpine SG Pipers that is being led by the number one chess player in the world, Magnus Carlsen. And then we have the Ganges Grandmasters. I hope I got that pronunciation right, which is led by the living legend himself, Viswanathan Anand. And then, of course, we have the Mumba Masters, who is led, which is, we have Maxime Lagrave being their leader. And of course, we have the American Gambits being led by Karuna Kamura and the Triveni Continental Kings being led by, I think, Alireza Firuza. And then lastly, the Alaskan Knights being led by Anish Giri. This is a 6 team round robin match. So on the first day, we have 3 matches actually. We have the Mumbai Masters going against the American Gambits. And the second match, we have the Ganges Grandmasters going against the Alpine Pipers. And in the match 3, we have the Alaskan Knights going against the Continental Kings. Very interesting games. And we actually just going to go through one game from each of those matches. Yes, between the Mumbai Masters and the American Gambits, I think the American Gambits won by the score to, of 11-6, and the Ganges Grandmasters lost to the Pipers by the same score of 6-11. While the Alaskan Knights, I would say, beat up on the Continental Kings 15-3. That's a real beating. So we're going to check a game from each of the matches played. So the first game we're going to check today is the game between, I think, what's his name? Yeah, I think he's from Norway. His name is, sorry, excuse me. Get off there, buddy. His name is Jonas. Is playing against Swadwani Random from India. So the game started with the move e4, c6, d4, d5, captures back, c3. Now this is a very interesting and quiet line against the Karokan. And I'm going to say I'm a little bit biased going over this game because I've had problems playing against the Karokan lately, and I've been thinking, what kind of line should I play against the Karukan? So when I saw this game, I'm like, okay, well, this is a good idea, and this is something I would mind trying out. And of course, the reason is because it doesn't really have any kind of risk of you just losing right off from the opening, because this opening looks very straightforward. Already White has possibilities of getting his bishop into the game. Excuse me. He has his bishop. He has possibilities of his bishop. Both bishops actually. Okay. The knight can go to f3. I mean, he has a very free position. So even the engine says it's just a slight advantage for White. So let's keep going. Knight f6 is played. Bishop to d3. And now that's an interesting one. I think the reason why bishop d3 is played is after the knight f3, I think White was trying to avoid the bishop to g4. Because now if bishop g4 comes, I can just move my queen to b3, hitting the pawn on b7 immediately, like asking that pawn some questions. So bishop d3 was played. After bishop to d3, bishop g4, exactly what I thought. Knight f3, he actually played knight f3. Interesting. Of course, you don't want to take because queen takes, now you don't have the 2 bishops, and then, you got to be careful because the position can easily get opened up and then you're going to have some difficulties. So knight f3 was played, queen to c7, queen a4 check, bishop back to d7, queen to c2. Now that's a very interesting maneuver. Queen a4, queen to c2. Now bishop g4 doesn't work because I just have knight to e5, hitting on the bishop. And if the bishop moves back, I can go back here with the bishop check. I have queen to a4, and then have some pressure along that diagonal. So e6 is played, castles, bishop to d6. That's a good square for the bishop, putting pressure on h2 immediately. Rook to e1, centralizing the rook. Bishop to c6. I have no idea why that move was made. Oh, okay. Yeah, makes some sense. I guess the idea is to get the knight into the game. Knight b d7. Keeping an eye on the e5 square. So knight e5 immediately. White plays knight e5 immediately. And that's always a very strong move. When you toss a knight to e5 supported by a pawn, bishop, sometimes the bishop can come to f4. Sometimes you have knight d2, knight f4. This looks pretty much like the London system, kind of, These are positions that kind of come out from the London system. So let us see how black continue with this game. Knight to e5 was played. Knight b d7. That was expected. Queen to e2, making sure that the knight on e5 is well protected. Looking at this position already, we could tell that black is going to have some problems with the light squared bishop. Why? Because of the pawn on d5 blocking the bishop. That don't look so good for black. But hey, guess what? This is still the opening phase. A lot of things can still change. So queen e2 is played. Castles. Knight to d2 makes a lot of sense. In a game of chess, it's very important we get all our pieces into the game, especially the minor pieces. And when you start the game, when you're talking about the opening, middle game, your minor pieces are very important. And what are your minor pieces? We're talking about your bishops and your knights. So knight d2 is played. After knight d2, rook to e8, centralizing the rook. Although, it's a questionable move because I don't see the e file getting opened up any moment from now or anytime soon. So that's going to really ask the rook on e8 a lot of questions, like what exactly is the rook doing on e8? That's a closed file, and it's only white that has some kind of pressure on that file right now. And it's not as if white is even trying to use this file. Okay, it's just going to be a springboard for white to probably get some attack going on towards the black king. So let's keep going. Knight f3, knight d to f3, more support on the knight on e5, knight to f8. Every move made, we have to ask questions. What's the point of knight f8? Knight g6 is possible. Defending the h7 is possible. You gotta think about every possible thing. So knight f8, no really threats, just probably trying to shuffle the pieces, try to get some squares, good squares to put the pieces. So knight goes to g5. Immediately there's a threat on f7. And the interesting thing about this knight to g5 is it allows white to move the pawn to f4. And in such positions, there is something we call the piece play, there is something we call the pawn play. And normally in such positions, you actually want to try to use your pawns to kind of weaken the opponent's position a little bit. And then after that, you're going to come in with some piece play. So knight g5 is very interesting because after knight g5, you could follow with the move f4. And then you could actually bring your knight back and then play g4, g5. These pieces are kind of locked out because of this e5 knight. So all those pieces really are not doing anything because of this knight on e5. So knight g5 is played, rook to e7, defending the square f7 twice with the rook and the king. And now this should give us something to worry about. Anytime your king is defending anything, it's a red flag. You don't want your king defending anything. It's like having a celebrity defending his bodyguard. You don't want situations like that. Anytime you have such situations like that, it's a red flag. So let's keep going. Bishop to f4. White finally develops his last minor piece, bishop to f4. And guess what? Putting some more pressure on the e5 square, protecting the knight on e5. Bishop to e8. Black's position looks really ugly. Like, none of the pieces are really doing anything. You know, well, not doing much. Really, really ugly. So positions like this, white would look to try to open up on the king's side. White would look to try to open up the king's side. Throw some pawns there, throw some pieces there. Just try to cause some chaos on this part of the board. Because black is in no position to kind of defend any attack. Even though all the pieces are looking good on the king's side, but they are more in each other's way than actually helping each other. So bishop to e8, bishop goes to g3. I think the idea will be maybe to move the pawn to f4, maybe f5. We'll see. Knight goes to d7, queen to c2, threatening h7. We have three pieces. We have the knight, we have the bishop, and we have the queen. Now, normally when moves like this are made, the idea is just to force black to kind of push some pawns, create some weaknesses. Now, f6 is not going to be a good move at all, because after f6, bishop takes is very strong. If you take, you're going to get mated. I think you're going to get mated. Yes, I know that. Oh, this is even check. Does it have any? Oh, sorry, no. Just checkmate. Checkmate. Now, what if it doesn't take? What if after f6 bishop takes? Now, I think it's still very, very decisive. Can we play knight check there? It takes. Can we take back? It takes. So what do we have? We have bishop to g6. Um, what do we have? I don't think we have much here. So let's go back. I don't think we have much here. So after the move queen to c2, h6 was played. What if f6 is played? That's the question. Knight takes d7 is the right move, not taking on h7. Okay, but so h6 is played. The knight comes back. So what did the knight achieve? The pawn has been moved to h6. So now h7 is a little weaker than before the knight moved to g5. So f6, another weakness is created. By moving the pawn to f6, you have this pawn chain on the dark squares. If your pawns are on the dark squares, that means your light squares are going to be really weak. Now, don't be surprised if black gets crushed along the line in this opening on the light squares, because already we could tell that the light squares are looking really, really weak. Even though black still has his light square bishop, he really has to worry about those light squares. So f6 is played, knight takes d7, queen takes d7, rook to e3. This makes a lot of sense. Just let's double the rooks, put more pressure on the e file. And black is in no position to actually try to open up, because there is just so much going on from white's point of view. So in this situation, black just gonna have to wait to see how this game unfolds. Okay, we got two more games to go. Let's keep going. Bishop g6, rook a to e1, a6, knight to h4. What's the point of knight to h4? It's not a coincidence that the knight h4 puts more pressure on the light squares. And like we said earlier, the light squares are really weak in this position. And it's going to be very hard for black to keep it together. For how long, we do not know. So knight h4 is played. Rook a to e8. Queen to e2. Tripling on the e file. Bishop takes g3. H takes g3. Queen to d8. We have queen to d8. Probably vacating the d7 square for the knight. It's just unfortunate because black doesn't really have a lot of squares to put his pieces. So unfortunate. So let's see. Even after knight d7, what else does black have? Not a whole lot. But let's keep going. So f4, very good move. I think it's a good move because it discourages the move e5 and kind of cramps black position the move. So after the move f4, we have b5. Of course, you have to play b5. Why? You're trying to create some play. Try to create something. Try to make something happen. But is it going to be possible to make something happen? We're just going to have to find out. a3, rook to b7, g4. Not a good move. And of course, this is very human. You're trying to play g4, g5, maybe try to open up, trying to make something happen forcefully. But instead of the move g4, king h1 would have been a better move. And yeah, king h1 would have been a better move. So g4 was played here, and after g4, um, e5 was played immediately. Now, one of the drawbacks of the move g4 is if we look at this knight, after the move g4, all of a sudden this knight is not being defended by anything. And there's a queen on d8 looking at that knight. So if I can get the diagonal here opened up, the knight is going to be under attack. So e5 now makes a lot of sense, because if you capture, I capture back, I have a threat on the knight on h4. Let's see how white goes about that. Captures with the d pawn, captures back with the f pawn. Of course, now you have to move the knight from h4 to f5 because the knight was under attack. So after knight to f5, e4. Now after e4, the game is just equal. And when this game started, white was really looking very good because he had a lot of space advantage, and which really cramped up black's position. Black didn't really have any kind of free move, but right now the position is just equal. So let us see how white was able to make something happen from this position. So bishop to b1 is played. Very, very important move, because with the bishop to b1, we can go to a2, put in pressure on d5. Now d5 becomes a new weakness. So we necessarily do not have to go after this king. We could just shift our focus on this d5 and then just try to capture the pawn and then just win the game. Bishop to b1, a5. Of course, black is still going to have to create some play. Create some play means try to make something happen. Try to get your pieces into the game. You can't just sit while your opponent puts pressure on your weaknesses without you doing anything. It's not going to end well if you don't do something. So rook to d1, immediately we start the pressure on the d pawn. Started putting pressure. An immediate threat is just bishop takes e4 because of the pin on the d file. So the queen has to get away from the pin. Bishop to d5. Now we have two pieces attacking d5. The rook and bishop goes to the rook defense. Now we have three pieces attacking d5. Now this is the story. It's going to be about the d5 pawn. It is going to be about the d5. And I think actually right now, rook takes is a possible move. Rook takes, if pawn takes, bishop takes, check, followed by queen takes. Right, that's a possible move. Knight to f8 discourages the move rook takes, because now the knight defends the rook on d8. Rook goes back, and let me say this. The reason why the rook goes back is because by moving the rook back, the knight now cannot capture the pawn on f4, because of course the queen on d2 is protecting the square f4. So let's keep going. H5, knight to e3, threatening knight d5 is possible. And of course the knight also can capture back on g4. Knight takes f4, rook to f1, pinning the knight. And another thing I have to say about this match is it's a short time control. And with a short time control, a lot of things can go wrong very quickly. With a short time control, the way you play a rapid tournament is different from the way you play a blitz tournament, which is also different from the way you play a classical tournament. With a classical, you can space out yourself. With a blitz tournament, you don't have a whole lot of room for error, just like in the rapid. So, rook f1 is played. Queen to e5, getting away from the pin. Queen to f2. Now, from having a very good position, black is now actually better based on the engine. Queen f2 was a very bad move. Actually, based on the engine, it was a blunder. Knight f5 would have been a better move. And I think with knight f5, you're threatening to take on f4, because now you have two pieces. You have the queen and the rook on f1. So queen f2 is played. Knight to d3. Queen to h4, threatening the rook. Pressure on the pawn. The the f file is also something black has to be worried about. Queen goes to e7. Queen to h3 says, no, I don't want to exchange pieces. But like I said, right now, black has pretty much more than equalized, because he has a very good knight. He has a good bishop that is defending the, not just defending the king, but the light squares around the king. The rook is defending the seventh rank. There's a rook on the D file, and black position looks okay. Black position looks good, but it's interesting how things can change very quickly. And like I said, it's in a rapid tournament, in a rapid game. Things can go crazy very, very quickly. So let's see how this game continues. Knight takes b2. Okay, and this is where black lost the game. Kind of greedy though. He went to capture a pawn, although you can say, oh, with a threat. But after the move knight takes b2, the game ended very quickly due to the very strong rook takes f7. Now, let me say something about that rook f7. I know we have to get to the next game. Earlier on, we could see how black was able to, white was able to induce some weaknesses in black's camp, and these weaknesses were based on the light squares. So it's not a coincidence that white is giving up an exchange. What's the point of giving up the exchange? So that the light squares can be taken advantage of. So after the queen captures, rook takes f7, queen captures, rook takes, beautiful move. The simple threat is rook takes, there's check. The king moves, bishop takes queen. So now, if you remember, I'm going to say this again. Earlier in the game, we were talking about how weak black was on the light squares. Well, guess what? To really put a lot of emphasis on that weakness, white gave up his rook for the light square bishop, so that the light squares is just really, really bad. So rook takes, rook captures back on, rook takes on d5, rook to f8, rook takes h5. Now the queen has to take the bishop, and then after the rook check, the queen is going to come into the position, and then the game is going to be over very quickly. Rook check, king moves, queen check, king moves. Not the best move, but I think black is still losing. Queen check on c5, king comes to e6, rook takes on f8, knight to d3, rook check on e8, king goes to d7. Mate in 3 is unavoidable. Rook check, king moves, queen check, and after the king moves, this is checkmate here. Or if the rook comes here, that is checkmate. So this was a very interesting win by the American Gambits, and I think I think this was actually their board 6. And I have to say this: in the team event, we have 4 players male and then 2 female players. So let us get right into the next game. And the next game we have is between Uyifan and Vashali. These two are not aliens to all of us. We know who these people are. Uyifan, of course, the great Chinese female player, although she doesn't play active chess any longer. Uyifan and Vashali, and of course we know Vashali. Vashali is the younger sister to Prague. She's a grandmaster on her own, a force to reckon with. And also it should be noted that during the past Olympiad, Vashali was part of the gold winning team. Yeah, she was part of the gold winning team. So this is a game between Uyifan, Vashali and Uyifan. And I'm going to remind us, this game is a game in 20 minutes. I'm not sure if you had a time delay or increment. Normally it should have, but I think it's a, from some of the games I've seen, I think it's just a flat 20 minutes flat. So let's see how this game went. So Vashali started with the move e4. And one thing about Vashali is she's a very uncompromising player. Very, very uncompromising. So e4, e6, we have the French defense. d4, d5. Knight to d2, we have the Tarrasch variation. I used to play the Tarrasch variation a lot many years ago. And the reason was because the first win hour I ever played, I had a very nasty experience. Even though I won the game, I mean, I was just so scared of playing the win hour. But of course, later on, I picked it back up. So in this position, we're going for the Tarrasch variation. And the idea of the knight d2 is to discourage the bishop to b4, because we're just simply going to play c3. And the bishop's going to have to move back, losing a move. So black doesn't want to do that. c5, takes on d5, queen captures back. Knight gf3 takes on d4. Bishop to c4. This is all theory. This is all theory. Bishop to c4 is played. Queen goes to d7. This is all theory, like I said. Castles. Knight to f6. At this point of the game, everybody is trying to get all their pieces on the best squares possible. Trying to put their pieces on good squares, and just see how things happen from there. So, knight f6 is played. After knight f6, we have knight b3. White is going to go after the d pawn. White is going to win back the d pawn and have some kind of slight advantage. Very slight, nothing really spectacular. But knight c6 is played. Queen to e2. Now, queen e2 is a multi-purpose move. Apart from the fact that the queen is right here on e2, keeping an eye on the king, he also vacates the d1 square for the rook. So, a6 is played. b5 is a possibility. We don't want that to happen, so we play the pawn a4. Bishop to d6. Rook to d1. Queen to c7, putting pressure on the g3 pawn. Knight takes d4. Knight takes back. Now we have to use the rook, because if you use the knight, there's bishop takes pawn check, and then bishop goes back, and then we're back to being the pawn down. Rook takes d4, bishop to d7. Note that black is in no hurry to castle here, because once you castle, you become a target. Bishop g5 is possible, rook here is possible. All of a sudden, all these pieces just switches to the king side, and it might not be such a good idea for black. So, bishop to g5 is played anyways. Castles. Bishop takes a6. I said earlier that Vashali is a very uncompromising player. Actually, bishop takes a6 was really not such a good move. Prior to the bishop takes a6, white was actually better. I mean, obviously, because the pieces are better placed. The pieces are better placed compared to black's pieces. Black has already created a hook on a6, where in the next 1-2 moves we can easily put pressure on the pawn on a6, and black is going to have to find herself on the defensive side of this position, and it's not going to be very palatable. And of course, black needs a lot of time to try to get to the white king. So bishop a6 wasn't not such a necessary move. If it's something she's thought about, if it is something she's seen before, if it's something she has played, maybe, but in this situation, not a good move. Bishop to c6, very good move by black, trying to face the white king, putting all the pieces towards the white king. So rook to c4, pinning the bishop to the queen, to the king. Takes on a6, g3. Now, white is a piece down for nothing, really. White is a piece down for nothing. Because if you look at white's minor pieces, this knight here really can't do much. It's more of a target. Okay. Although this is a possibility, knight here putting pressure. Bishop really can't do much either. The rook is okay. It's still in the middle game, but rooks are not so good when it comes to middle game because they need more space to operate. So white is down a piece, but what does white have for this piece? It's kind of hard to tell what kind of compensation white has. So of course the knight d4 is a move coming because it puts pressure on the bishop on c6. I'm sure black is going to do something about that, and yes, she does. Moves the pawn to e5, stopping any piece from going to the d4 square. So b4. Now the idea is just to play b5 and exploit the pin on the c file. King moves to b8, because now if pawn push, pawn takes. If pawn takes, we can actually take here, attacking the queen. If you take, we have queen takes c4, and then we're up two pieces. And after the rook check, I think the king can just step out. I think so, right? Yeah. The king can step out. After the check again, I think the king can... Oh, the king can actually... Yeah, the king can go back. We can always go back with the bishop to block. So nothing to be worried about. So rook to c3. rook to c8. This makes a lot of sense for black. It's very important to extra protect the bishop here. Queen b7 is something that black might want to do, because after queen to b7, you're just trying to free your queen from the pin, exchange some pieces, and then black is just looking good. I'm going to say this again. I wasn't really sure about the piece sacrifice versatility. Sometimes when you're playing high-rated players, you get very intimidated, and you kind of just don't play so go well. You're not used to playing such opposition. Let me say. So sometimes we might want to do too much by thinking we have some ideas, and then things are not just working the way we expect. So let's go right back to the game. So bishop takes f6, g takes f6, queen takes a6, queen to b7, threatening the bishop, and threatening the knight, threatening to exchange queens. Remember, black is a piece up. Although this 3 pawns looks very scary, but playing against 2 bishops, I don't know how scary those pieces can really be. Queen a6, queen goes back to e2, bishop to e4. Very good move. Very good move. Because with bishop to e4, you're trying to trade pieces. Because the more pieces you trade, the stronger your pieces are going to get. Because if you can trade a rook off the board, then this pawn is going to be weak, this is going to be weak, this is going to be weak, and then we can get a chance to get our rook in the game. So after the move bishop to e4, rook a3, rook takes e2. Beautiful move. Because now the pawns are falling. The pawns are falling. Queen to d1, bishop to bishop to c7. What's the threat? Rook to d8, putting pressure on the queen on d1. Knight goes to e1, rook d8, queen to h5, threatening this pawn. What can we do here? We just totally ignore the pawn. If you want to take the pawn, go ahead. So what is the threat with the rook here? Apart from the fact white is moving away, black is moving away from the knight. I think rook back here is possible, because if rook takes, this pin might cause some problem for white. So queen takes f7, bishop to e b6. This is going to be a forced exchange of pieces, and the fewer the pieces on the board, the better black's position is going to be. Queen takes f6 and queen takes f6, attacking the rook, although it's been defended twice, not just with the bishop on b6, but the rook on d2. Bishop takes e3, queen takes e5 check. At this point in time, I think black is just looking to try to get a perpetual check, but I think this position is far from being a perpetual check. So queen blocks, queen takes on e4, bishop takes check, king to f1, bishop takes knight, and of course it's almost game over. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 against 1, 2. There is absolutely no way white is going to escape this position. All right, so the next game we're going to get through real quickly, which is the last game, is between the teams. What team is this? Mambinarov versus Rajabov. This is a very strange pairing, if you ask me. It's a very strange pairing because these are 2 countrymen that have represented their country together in several tournaments. So this is the team. This is the Alaskan Knights playing against the Continental Kings. The Alaskan Knights playing against the Continental Kings. So let us see how this game went. Alaskan Knights, yes. So this is between Rajabov and Mamedov, both from Azerbaijan. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, that's the Cuckoo piano, also known as the Italian game. Knight to f6, the 3 knights. d3, this is all theory. h6, all this has been played before. c3, and of course the idea of h6 is just to stop any of the infiltration of the black piece, of the white pieces on the g5 square. It's not so much about the f7, but just stopping the white pieces from getting to the g5 square. So g5, okay, well, maybe that's one thing we have to add. The idea of h6 is not just to stop the piece from going to the g5 square, but also to try to play g5, try to launch a quick attack on this king here. Because, of course, black is anticipating white castling to this part of the board, and is already thinking about how he's going to come get white's king. So, yes. So let's see. It's interesting because black is being very active, is yet to develop his pieces like he should. Like the bishops are still on the original squares. All he has is that all he has is the knights. The knights are in the game. The king is still in the center. So, but this is no surprise for me because I know Shak, aka Mamidarov. That's the way he plays. He's also a very uncompromising player. So let's keep going. H3 is played. Bishop G7, Knight BD2, D5 strikes in the center. Bishop goes to B3. The idea of Bishop B3 is you don't want to take this pawn. You want to make sure you have a pawn on E4. Your pawn on E4 is going to discourage Bishop from coming to F5. And of course, having a pawn in the central square has to be a plus. So Bishop to B3, Bishop to E6, Queen to E2, A6, Bishop to C2. What's the point of Bishop to C2? Multiple reasons. Probably keeping an eye on this diagonal one, vacating the B3 square for the knight. The knight can go to C5, putting pressure on E6. The knight can go to C5, protecting the pawn on E4. Just trying to put the pieces on the best squares. But after the bishop's move, bishop to C2, black's position is actually preferred by the engine. So bishop C2 is played. Queen to D7. Knight F1. Like in this position, castling is just suicidal, really, because after this move, castle's long. White's never going to have a chance to get out of this attack. So knight F1 makes a lot of sense. Knight F1, knight E3, keeping an eye on the G4, F5 square, keeping an eye on the G4 square, keeping an eye on the D5 square. And knight goes to H5. Knight G3, knight takes, F takes G3, F5. Like I said, Shak is very uncompromising player. He's just going to keep coming at you. He's just going to keep coming at you. But I'm just surprised because this is his countryman. But apparently, hey, it's still a game. So each player are representing their various teams. So it's not about, being from the same country. It's about scoring for your team. And I think at the end of the day, it's still just chess. F5 is played. Castles. Finally, white castles. Thinking at least, it's not so bad. Castles long. It's just going to get worse because now, with opposite type castling, this is something I've said in the past. The first person to make a contact with the opposing position always have an advantage. So in this position, if black can get to the king first, either by pushing the pawn or sacrificing the pawn, he's going to have some kind of advantage. And if white is the one that's able to get to the black king first, he's also going to have an advantage. So let's see who gets to the other person's king first, and let's see how this game turns out. Takes on F5, takes back, bishop to D2, trying to finish developing all the pieces, connecting the rooks. That cannot be a bad move. Rook to E8. We have an X-ray attack on the queen on E2. So, okay, I would assume maybe rook E1 so that I can step aside this way. I don't want to come here because I don't want situations like that. So maybe rook A E1. Maybe rook A E1 and then queen to E2, just getting away from this rook on E8. So rook A D1 is played. D E4 captures back. Now there's a problem here. Bishop takes, rook takes. Well, pawn takes is also possible. So let's see what happened. Bishop takes, pawn takes. Now this is the thing. If the knight moves, let's say knight H4, knight H4 is bad. Let's say knight H2. It's just some advantage for, excuse me, it's going to be some advantage for black. Yes, for black. And come to think about it, black's pieces are looking really good, and his pawns are really way advanced, and they can actually hit on white's position very quickly. White's position is not so good. The rooks are fine, you know. The bishop not so good. The knight has to move, get away from the very active f3 square. And after the move e4, knight takes g5, takes back, bishop takes. So white was able to win an exchange. But even after the exchange, it was still a very slight advantage for black. So um, in this position, what does white have for the piece? He has the three pawns here on the king side, and what else? It really doesn't have any attack on this king. So in this game, he's looking actually for a situation to promote this pawn somehow. If he can't promote this pawn, then he has absolutely nothing, because there is no way these two rooks and the queen can cause any problem for this king. So the only way is to kind of use the files on the board or the ranks to try and get something. How that's going to work, I have no clue. Knight to f7, queen to e3, king goes to b8. It's very important you hide the king. Of course, if you don't do that, queen here is very strong, because after the check, you come out, there's queen takes pawn possibility, there's rook to d1. You don't want your king in the open. That's not going to be good. You don't want your king in the open. So let's keep going. Rook to e2, defending the second rank, or maybe also trying to double either to the e file or maybe to the f file. Knight goes to d6, g4. Like I said, one thing about chess is you always have to use your advantage. The only advantage white has here, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact of he has his three pawns here. But there's something about these three pawns. These three pawns, you can't afford to move them carelessly. Why? Because the king is right behind those pawns. So you can't afford to move those pawns carelessly, because if you do, you're going to expose your king and you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And you do not want to get in a lot of trouble. So let's keep going. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, h4. Queen to d5. Pawns are moving. Like I said, yes, the pawns are moving. The king has to be worried somehow. Pawns are moving. Knight to c4. Queen goes to f4. Threatening nothing really. Bishop e5, attacking the queen. Queen goes to f7. Blunder according to the engine. Queen goes to c4. c5 check. Queen comes back to block. e3. This is a very strong and annoying pawn, being defended by the knight. I don't know. That pawn is a little bit annoying. I don't know how white can get rid of the pawn, and unfortunately, it doesn't have a minor piece to get rid of the pawn. And if you use any of the major pieces to get rid of the pawn, then you're just a piece down. I think, yeah, you're gonna be just a piece down. So, and these two pawns are really not going anywhere. You know, they look like they're trying to get somewhere, but really they can't, because there's so many things white would have to worry about in this position. So let's keep going. Queen to f7, attacking the rook on e8. Also putting pressure on the knight on c4. Knight goes to d6, protecting the rook, attacking the queen. Queen to f3. Like I said, it's kind of hard to attack this king. The only advantage you have is this pawn. So if white cannot queen this pawn, white is just losing. Simple as that. So queen, now black starts to put pressure on the pawn. Black starts to put pressure on the pawn. g4. Now this is really, really dangerous. Although you might be like, what else is he going to do? But it is dangerous anyway. g4. Knight goes to e4. Queen to c2. If you take the rook here, I'm going to take yours check. And king moves out. Any other checks? I'm not sure. But does black have any threats? Oh, there's going to be a checkmate here. So let's see how black made that move. Oh, queen c6 was a bad move. I think queen e2 was a right move, because after queen takes e8 check, we have king to a7. Queen takes e5, stopping the checkmate. But then queen takes g4 check is very strong for black. Black is just winning after this. And why? The king is so exposed. This king is this king can't be taken care of, as in, from any kind of danger. But the white king is so exposed. So in this position, I think white played black played queen c6, not the best move. And I said this earlier. In rapid games, there are always a lot of mistakes based on the time situation. Always a lot of mistakes. So we go to this point. Yeah, queen c6, rook takes e3, and after the queen takes queen to e6, c6, black really lost a lot of his advantage. Even though black is still better, but he lost a lot of his advantage. And rook takes bishop to d6, um, b4. I don't know. Okay, stopping the bishop from coming to c5, pinning the rook to the king. Rook to b8, rook to f8, attacking the queen. Queen moves away. That's a blunder. Rook takes check, king takes, knight check, king moves, queen goes to h1, and queen h2 is very strong. It's very strong move, hard to meet. And I think after queen h1, black won the game. White resigned, and this was how Mamidarov was able to defeat Rajabov. And I think the score ended in 15-3. I think the the Alaskan Knights they won. So those are the three games we're going to go through. These are just the games from the first day, which is the 3rd of October. We have all other games that has been played, and they're still the knockout stage, by the way. So we are going to stop from here, and we would continue with the coverage, pretty much the recap for this very interesting Global Chess League going on in London. As always, thanks for being here. Take care, God bless, and see you soon.